And it was very interesting because it wasn't so much Wu Dawei who reacted. I think he picked up another cigarette at that point. But his entire delegation, and there are many, you know, whenever you meet with Wu Dawei, it was like two delegations with 40 people in them. And the Chinese delegation consisted of very young people, very well educated, who in many cases spoke English, and they all got the point. They all got the point. And I really felt that what I could see on the Chinese side was kind of a generational divide on the issue of North Korea. And I think too, as you know, even though the U.S. Newspapers continues to insist that this is all about the fact that the Chinese don't want to have North Korean refugees. If North Korea collapses, there'll be North Korean refugees, that somehow this will destabilize China. This is the sort of narrative you read in the U.S. newspapers. In fact, what we could see through this process of dealing in the six-party talks was really the complexity of the Chinese position, which is many Chinese, whether the foreign ministry, business community in Shanghai, academics, they had no interest in preserving a relationship that frankly many of them were absolutely embarrassed to have. And yet when you looked over at the Chinese Communist Party, if you looked at the Chinese military, if you looked at various veterans associations through China, it was a rather different view of North Korea. And so I think that through the six-party talks, we've developed a much more sophistication in understanding the Chinese position on North Korea. And basically the Chinese position is split. There are many different views, and for that reason China has had a difficult time making that turn. To be sure, some people say, well, the Chinese are trying to keep North Korea on the agenda to cause problems for the U.S. But I think the problem is more complex, has to do with these various interest groups, has to do with the fact that old think, if you will, in China is still very prevalent. And so there are many people in China, I would put them often in the military or in the security field, who feel that somehow if North Korea were to disappear, that this would be a bad day for China and a good day for the U.S. I think the Chinese, those Chinese take a view that somehow this is a zero-sum game. And I think the notion that there is a win-win solution, well, I would just say that I think many Chinese, when they hear the term win-win, they think you're talking about a Burmese dissident or something, rather than an outcome that I think is very much available. How we manage this North Korean issue in the future will really, in many ways, help shape the environment for how we manage our relationship with China. I don't think it is helpful or produces any results to be shaking our finger at the Chinese on this. I think rather we need to have some serious discussions of what the Korean Peninsula would look like if, as we do anticipate, sooner or later, and I hope sooner, and I hope in our lifetimes, that there is a single Korean state on the Korean Peninsula, and that state is the successor state of the Republic of Korea. And I think we need to do a much better job of talking to the Chinese seriously and honestly about what our interests would be in such a scenario. I don't think the United States has any interest in stationing troops north of the 38th parallel. I think these are assurances that can be given to the Chinese. I don't think we have any interest in exacting some kind of strategic advantage from the demise of North Korea. I don't think we have any interest in putting listening posts up in the Yalu River or otherwise creating a strategic advantage for the United States. I think we really need to try to put our cards on the table with the Chinese and show what we would like to see in terms of new security arrangements on the Korean Peninsula. We should not be telling the Chinese, we should not be making assurances to the Chinese about what the South Koreans, what the successor state would be doing. That is, we should not be infringing on Republic of Korea sovereignty in this regard. But I think it is a fair thing for us to do is to lay out some of our plans with some transparency on what we would expect to see in a collapsed North Korea. Now, whether that is sending special troops up to secure the nuclear facilities or engaging in rather widespread humanitarian operations, I think we should have a much more open discussion with the Chinese. I suspect it would be a very one-sided discussion. I suspect that about the first 50 or 100 times the Chinese would not want to really respond to this discussion. But I think sooner or later they will, and I think we need to engage in this now, because I think as we look at the succession question, we've already seen Kim Jong-il become Kim Jong-very-ill, and then we've seen Kim Jong-il become Kim Jong-not-so-ill in recent months. But sooner or later, even Kim Jong-il is going to ascend into the heavens, or whatever he plans to do. So there is a succession issue there, and I think it's a succession issue that the North Koreans really don't know how to manage. I think it is appropriate for us to be talking to the Chinese about that. The other thing that I think is very appropriate to happen is for the ROK to have discussions with the Chinese. And here I think the Chinese have made some very bad mistakes. The Chinese and the US, we make mistakes with each other all the time, and somehow we manage to recover from those mistakes, because I think the US-China relationship is, as they say, too big to fail. But I think the Chinese really need to understand that they are making some historic mistakes in dealing with the ROK. That is, when a North Korean submarine sinks an ROK ship, and when everybody with a triple-digit IQ understands precisely what happened, it seems to me the Chinese ought to try to position themselves in a better place than to be halfway between idiocy and the truth. And I think the Chinese position on the Chonghua sinking is unacceptable in terms of a relationship with the ROK, and I hope the Chinese will think that one through. The North Koreans are behaving in a way that nobody, not even that cell phone, should support. I mean, the North Koreans are behaving in a way that I think the Chinese need to understand that the world is watching for how China deals with this. You know, we all have friends from our teenage years that we probably don't want to count as our friends today. I suspect the Chinese have a bit of that feeling when they think of the North Koreans. But I think the Chinese, if they don't want to use that awful American expression, throw the North Koreans under the bus, although in the case of the North Koreans I find it less awful, but if they don't want to engage in that, they certainly, I think, should be looking to really see in a qualitative sense how they can improve that relationship with the ROK. The Chinese have done it in a quantitative sense. When you look at the trade relationships with the ROK, if you look at the ROK investments in China, when you look at Chinese investments now coming into the ROK, we can see some real improvements. But I think the Chinese need to sit down and really talk with the ROK about where that relationship is going. I think the six-party process was an opportunity to begin that kind of conversation, but I think it has to go a lot further if we're going to get through what I do believe will be an ultimate North Korean demise. You know, Wu Dawei once said to me, we need to do this on a step-by-step basis, and I guess I understand that, but there's a point in time when you have to kind of do more than just step-by-step. In fact, I thought that was a good opportunity to tell Wu Dawei a story from Polish history, not that he had much context for that, but I pointed out that one time there was a Polish party first secretary named Władysław Gomułka, and he was known for long speeches and unsuccessful metaphors, and one day he said to a large crowd in Krakow, he said, "Comrades, just a few years ago, our nation stood on the very edge of a deep abyss, and I'm here to tell you, comrades, that we've taken an important step forward."